Welcome to the National Press Club. We're very fortunate to have Mr. Edwin Fountain discuss the World War I Memorial. My name is Tony Gallo. I am your moderator. I'm with the National Press Club. In July 2013, Mr. Fountain was appointed by Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid to the U.S. World War I Centennial Commission. He was elected Vice Chairman of the Commission in July 2014. Mr. Fountain is a graduate of the University of North Carolina, the London School of Economics, and the University of Virginia Law School. Mr. Fountain.
Thank you, Tony, and good morning. My name is Edwin Fountain. I am Vice Chairman of the U.S. World War I Centennial Commission. The commission was formed by Congress in January 2013 and given the mission of ensuring a suitable observation in this country of the centennial of the Great War, and more importantly of commemorating the service of American servicemen and women and educating the American public about the causes and consequences of that war. It has 12 members appointed by the President, the majority and minority leaders of both houses of Congress, the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the National World War I Museum in Kansas City. I'm here this morning to talk about the Commission's proposal to establish a new National World War I Memorial on Pennsylvania Avenue in the nation's capital. And I'd like to start with some brief context about the history of this country's memorialization of its wars. Those of us who work and live in Washington are very familiar with the great man approach to memorials. The town is full of equestrian and other statues to Civil War and Revolutionary War generals, other political leaders. Pershing Park, where we proposed to establish a new memorial, was sort of the last of the great man war memorials in this city, erected in the late 1970s, a memorial to General John J. Pershing, the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I. After the Civil War and after World War I itself, local communities all around the country established memorials to their local residents who fought and died in the wars. And so those of us who grew up in the eastern half of the country are very familiar with Civil War memorials. There's Silent Sam on the campus of my university, University of North Carolina. There's the statue of the Confederate soldier on Washington Street in Old Town Alexandria here. The D.C. War Memorial is a fine example of a local memorial to World War I. It wasn't until the 1970s that we began thinking in terms of national war memorials, and not to the generals but to the common soldiers in our nation's capital. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial was a game changer in memorials in this country by being a national memorial on the Mall to the everyday soldier who fought and died in that war. We have been backfilling ever since. After the Vietnam Veterans Memorial came the Korean Veterans Memorial and then World War II. And we are now here talking about World War I. One of the differences with World War I is that there is no living constituency. The last American veteran of World War I, Frank Buckles, passed away 3 years ago at the age of 110. So there is not the representation of veterans in Congress. There is not the representation of veterans on the boards of our major corporations and foundations. So it's a different challenge for us, but one we think we can meet. I got involved in this effort some years ago when I decided to advocate for restoration of the D.C. War Memorial in the Mall, which had fallen into disrepair. And that effort led me to talk about rededicating that memorial as a national and local World War I memorial on the Mall. The question will come up, why Pershing Park? Why don't you want to be on the Mall? That's an excellent question. The Commission thinks that working from a blank slate, we would be on the Mall. But Congress enacted the Commemorative Works Act some years ago to govern the establishment and location of memorials in the nation's capital. And one clause of the Commemorative Works Act provides that the National Mall is a completed work of civic art, and that there shall be no new memorials, monuments, museums, visitor centers, what have you, on the Mall, except for those that were grandfathered in, such as the World War II Memorial, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, and the proposed museum and visitor center at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. So a foundation that I formed fought for a couple of years to get a National World War I Memorial on the Mall. But the DC government leadership, Eleanor Holmes Norton and Mayor Gray, were strongly opposed to that proposal. The National Park Service and others that are stewards of the mall were opposed to that proposal. So when it came time for the commission to think about establishment of a memorial, we decided not to fight a losing battle by trying to be on the mall, and we chose to propose redevelopment of Pershing Park. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with it, Pershing Park is actually just located 1 block away from the National Press Club. If you can see the picture on the upper left of this board, that's an overhead shot. Pershing Park is bounded on the southern edge by Pennsylvania Avenue across the street from the Department of Commerce. It's between 14th and 15th Streets, and the northern edge of the park is Pennsylvania Avenue next to the Willard Hotel and the Occidental Restaurant. It's a prime location. It anchors one end of what is the most significant concourse in the nation's capital, Pennsylvania Avenue. From Pershing Park, you have a direct line of sight down to the Capitol Dome. It is 1 block away from the White House and from the Treasury Department. It's as I say, a symbolically important location, which is why it was chosen in the first place as a memorial to John Pershing and the American Expeditionary Force. And it's one that could receive a lot of foot traffic for people visiting the White House and other sites in this part of town. And it's just located just a few blocks off the mall. So to us, it's a highly important location. One we think merits a significant memorial, and one that we think would do justice to the veterans of World War I. Again, we prefer them all, but we play the cards we're dealt with. Now, its location aside, there are serious drawbacks to the memorial site. First of all, it is it's a park with a World War I commemorative element located in it. And if you can see, the Pershing Memorial is tucked away in the lower right corner in that photograph, in the southeast corner of that site. And that part of the park is very obscured from the street. It's elevated, and there are 10, 12-foot grass or earthen berms topped by 10-foot stone walls on that corner of the park. So to the passerby, there is nothing inviting about the park. There's nothing that says World War I or Pershing Memorial. There's nothing that draws you in. The 2 sides of the park that are at all accessible to passersby are the western edge, 15th Street, which is at the far edge of where the memorial element is. So as you look into the park from 15th Street, you don't really see the memorial component that's currently there. And on the north edge, Pennsylvania Avenue, there's the taxi stand and a line of parking spots that service the Willard and the other restaurants and hotels there. And so it's very uninviting to passersby, and there's nothing about it that draws you in. Second drawback to the current site is that it is a history lesson more than a memorial. If you see this wall there, that has 2 very good maps of the Western Front and the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, and some very nice narrative text about the involvement of the United States in World War I. But there is no mention in that text of 116,000 American servicemen who gave their lives during the war. There's no mention of the fact that the combat fatality rate for U.S. forces in 5 months of fighting in World War I was twice that of World War II. There's no mention that America suffered more combat fatalities in World War I in 5 months than in either 3 years in Korea or 8 years of active combat in Vietnam. When I testified on the Hill a few months ago on the bill that would authorize this memorial, there was also testimony on a bill to add a feature to the Korean War Memorial. And the advocate for that bill said with great emphasis that in Korea, America lost 1,000 men a month. Well, in World War I, we lost 10,000 men a month. What people in this country don't know about World War I is what a horrific and bloody and savage war it was. And they don't understand that American servicemen demonstrated the same valor and courage and heroism and feats of arms in World War I that they have in every other war that this country has fought. And part of the Commission's mission is to educate the American people about that, in addition to the broader geopolitical aspects of the war. The memorial that's there now is also very unemotional. Again, you can't quite see, but There's a statue of General Pershing with a pair of binoculars in his hands. And as I say, he's not even riding a horse. With all due respect to the designers of this memorial, it's a very static, passive memorial that lacks any real pathos or humanity. You compare it to the list of names on the wall in the Vietnam Memorial, or the platoon of soldiers at the Korean Memorial, or the tableaus at the Grant Memorial. Each of those in very different ways really conveys something about the humanity of the warfare, and this one frankly does not. It's a memorial to General Pershing, but not much else. So those are some criticisms of the current site and why we think it needs to be not just redesignated as a National World War I memorial, but reconceived and redeveloped. Most importantly, as I say, right now it is a park that happens to have a World War I commemorative feature. Our objective is to make it first and foremost a World War I memorial that is located in an urban park setting. We are certainly very alive to the fact that this is and should be a working urban park. In my view, there will be three groups of people that would come to this memorial. First, the World War I enthusiasts who want to come pay their respects to the veterans of World War I. Second, the guests and workers and other visitors who work or live or come to that part of town and want a nice urban oasis to get away to have lunch or just take a breather. And then the third, we hope that there will be here an iconic work of art that serves as the major commemorative feature that will draw people in its own right, regardless of theme. So that is our vision for the memorial. Now, we have the sense not to have a preconceived notion of what a design of this park would be as a new memorial. And we anticipate and have already begun planning for a design competition. We anticipate, Tony mentioned the Eisenhower Memorial. I'm not involved in that process, but I followed it to some extent, and suffice it to say, we will do things differently than have been done with the Eisenhower Memorial. And so I anticipate that the Commission will throw this open to an open design competition, much as was done with the Vietnam Memorial, that yielded that stunning and surprising design that really changed the ground with respect to memorials in this country and in the world, indeed. And that competition will involve most likely 2 rounds of competition. We'll have an open competition from which we will select a handful of finalists, give them stipends to further develop their designs. There will be an independent panel of jurors that will make recommendations to the Commission on selection of finalists and the winning design. It will ultimately be the Commission's choice, but again, the Commission has the sense to know that we are not design experts, and it's not our place to preconceive what a design would look like. It is also our intention to engage the many stakeholders in this memorial and in this site at the very outset of the process, so that we can tell entrants into the design competition, so we can give them a very clear view of the parameters of the site, what features need to be there, need not to be there, what sort of feel we're looking for the site, what other uses besides memorial uses will be provided by the site, how it will relate to Freedom Plaza across the street and the surrounding neighborhood. It's a very complex site given its location, and a lot of thought will be required at the outset of the competition. So we will have discussions with the National Park Service, the National Capital Planning Commission, the Commission of Fine Arts, obviously the neighbors who are located around the park, veterans groups, many other stakeholders, so that we have a consensus on what our objective is before we even begin a competition. There's currently no budget for the site other than what we have done on the back of an envelope. The World War II and Martin Luther King memorials each ran about $100 million. I'm realistic. I don't believe we can raise $100 million for a World War I memorial, but nor do we envision something as elaborate as World War II memorial. In my own mind, I hearken back to the DC War Memorial, which I fell in love with precisely because it was a quiet, serene, contemplative, sober place, removed from the hustle and bustle of the city around it. And it's that kind of contemplative feel, that kind of somber character I would like to recreate in a World War I memorial. This will not be a triumphant memorial because there was absolutely nothing triumphant about World War I. And so we do not envision a complex memorial. Our working budget for this, and again, this is barely back of the envelope, so I don't want to hear 2 years from now that we've exceeded our budget, is about $10 to $15 million. If we go much beyond that, we become too ambitious for the purposes, and frankly, too ambitious for what's realistic in terms of fundraising. The schedule is ambitious. It's remarkable looking back that the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was completed start to finish in 28 months. That's nearly impossible in today's memorial environment. We have a little over 4 years. Working backward, we would hope to dedicate this memorial on Armistice Day 2018, which would be the 100th anniversary of the armistice that ended World War I. So working back from that, we anticipate conducting the design competition through most of 2015, working on getting the necessary design approvals from their various reviewing agencies during 2016, spending 2017 doing the engineering drawings, breaking ground Veterans Day 2017, and completing and dedicating the memorial by Veterans Day 2018. It's that 4 years is a tight time frame for a memorial of this significance. But we think we've gone to school on other memorial projects in this city over the last 30 years, and we think if we do the work right up front, we can make the process go quickly and efficiently, and yield a memorial that will stand the test of time and do proper justice to the veterans of American veterans of World War I. This ultimately we hear a lot about the greatest generation. This was what I call the silent generation. They were the parents of the greatest generation. They suffered through two great calamities, World War I and the Great Depression, and then they sent their sons and daughters off to fight in World War II. Again, that goes back to why this is not a triumphant memorial, but this is something more somber and reflective and reverential. That would do justice to a generation of Americans that largely is not recognized in this country, certainly not by today's generations, for the contributions and sacrifices they made for this country. So that is our proposal and our plan. Again, we've, I should say a word about the pending legislation if I haven't. Introduced a bill to authorize the Commission to proceed with this proposal. Bills were introduced simultaneously in the Senate and the House earlier this year on a bipartisan basis. We are very grateful to Representative Emanuel Cleaver of Kansas City and Senators McCaskill and Blunt of Missouri, who have been our champions in this effort, along with Congressman Ted Poe from Texas, who has been involved in World War I memorial efforts for several years now. They have really carried the water with us. Senator Rockefeller has been of great assistance, as well as have others. So as I say, bills were introduced in both houses on a bipartisan basis. The House bill was passed as an amendment to the Defense Appropriation Bill earlier this year, so it has already been approved by the House. Hearings have been held in the Senate a couple months ago. We anticipate that if the Senate does not also pass the Defense Appropriation Bill this Congress, that the memorial bill will move forward on a standalone basis before the end of this Congress and get passed by both Senate and House. So there is no significant opposition to this proposal. All the major federal agencies with jurisdiction over this site are on board and have come out publicly in support of the proposal. I talked to your neighbor Oliver Carr a few weeks ago, and they're very engaged in it as well. Oliver Carr, of course, owns the Willard Hotel, and so this is easy. The problem is, I guess, a couple months ago when I was testifying before a House panel on this, the chairman of that subcommittee said to another group that was also testifying that day, he said, "You've got a real problem. This bill makes sense. It's the right thing to do, and we don't do things that way up here." And so that's my one concern about this is I don't have to tell you all about how things work on Capitol Hill. Even the easy stuff is hard. But this is easy. It is the right thing to do. Time is of the essence. With the attention that the centennial of the start of the war has brought just in the last few weeks, we think we will, we're optimistic the bill will pass, and we will begin moving forward.
We now have time for questions, and I'll call on you. Can you please give your name and identify who you're with, and if you're just with the National Press Club or whatever, say that too.
Yeah, I'm Andrea Stone. I'm a freelancer. I'm a member of the Press Club, freelancing for takepark.com. Can you tell me, is this the first war memorial in this country or in Washington that's ever been done where there hasn't been one single person, veteran of that? And why do you think that it's taken 100 years? Why wasn't this done a long time ago?
To the first part of your question, I can't speak to whether there are memorials to the War of 1812 or to the Spanish-American War or other conflicts that were done after all the veterans had passed. As to why it has taken so long, again, the idea of national war memorials of this sort is only a 30-year-old idea. It was the Vietnam veterans. I should say that the good citizens of Kansas City, Missouri, did erect a memorial soon after World War I, not just to the residents of Kansas City, but to all the nation's veterans. And to that extent, there has been, a national World War I memorial for quite some time, but in Kansas City. And with all due respect to Kansas City, it's not the nation's capital and does not draw the national and international visitors that this city does. But the idea of a national memorial in the nation's capital, again, only goes back 30 years. And the Vietnam veterans advocated for and established their memorial, and since then, as I say, we've been working back in reverse order. We did Korea and then World War II, and now we're getting to World War I. And so it's a recent phenomenon. We used to commemorate wars primarily locally, or with respect to the Civil War, with memorials on the battlefields themselves. Obviously, that can't be done with respect to the wars of the 20th century.
Alan?
Alan Schlafer, National Press Club. The National Gallery in London has an art exhibit now commemorating the devastation of World War I. What is being done in this country that will help educate and re-educate the American public and the media along similar lines, and to help build a growing consensus and support for your memorial?
Many different things, and the commemoration of the centennial in this country is unfolding in classic American fashion in two respects. One, as with World War I itself, we're late to the party. The Europeans have been planning for their centennial efforts for much longer and have been dedicating more significant resources than this country has as a nation. And that makes sense because it was much more a European experience than it was an American experience for many obvious reasons. The war was fought there for 4 years, whereas we fought for 5 months. Their loss of life was significantly greater than ours. It was fought largely over European causes, and we were drawn into the war by attacks on U.S. interests. And then second, it's being done very much on a grassroots basis. Congress in its wisdom formed our commission and gave us a charter and gave us no resources, because apparently that's how this country establishes memorials and commemorates its great events, by calling on private citizens to do it on their own dime. And at the same time, a very explicit part of our statutory mission is to reach out around the country and facilitate, encourage, support other organizations that are engaged in World War I centennial activities. And so much of what we've been doing in our initial months is building that network of organizations. And the gratifying thing is that so many organizations are out there already doing things on their own without any encouragement from us. The New York Public Library, for instance, already has an exhibit up now that started on July 28th. Regarding the war. A couple months ago, I was at a planning meeting hosted by the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts that will be putting on what will be the definitive exhibition on World War I in American art. Kronos Quartet, which is the somewhat avant-garde classical music group, has already performed a symphony of their own composition on World War I. The Kansas City Symphony is working on a symphony as well. So there are groups around the country. One of our volunteers for the commission is spearheading the World War I Memorial Inventory Project, which sets out to document and every World War I memorial in the country, call attention to them, aid in their restoration, get the local citizens to research the names on those memorials. Glenn Marcus here is working on a major comprehensive documentary on America's involvement in World War I. So there are a lot of people out there doing a lot of things, and we are trying to coordinate with them and take credit for as much of what they're doing as possible, but also spearheading our own efforts. We have already held our first conference on World War I in Kansas City just 2 weeks ago, where we had a panel talking about the war. The University Club here in Washington tonight is hosting the first in what we think will be a series of programs on various aspects of World War I. We're in a preliminary partnership with Ohio State University to put on a conference in 2016 on military aspects of the war. We're actually talking to the press club about a possible conference next year, focusing on the events that drew the United States into war, including the media aspects of how things like the Lusitania sinking and other events were covered. So there is, just as in Europe, there is a lot going on, and we have the luxury to some extent of sort of ramping up to not to mix metaphors, but building to a crescendo of events in 2017-18, which will mark the centennial of America's actual participation in the war.
Ma'am?
Nikki Shaw with U.S. News and World Report. I was just curious if you've gotten any feedback from either Mayor Craig or Eleanor Holmesworth on this proposal.
Not specifically. I have been in touch with the District of Columbia's Historic Preservation Office, and they are informally supportive. They also sit, the district's State Historic Preservation Officer also sits on the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission. That commission has signed off unanimously in support of this proposal. So to that extent, the District of Columbia has been heard. I believe Delegate Norton has previously spoken in support of this site, but we have not engaged with him directly on it. It's a National Park Service site. Obviously, the District of Columbia controls the streets around it, but I've never heard of any opposition. I'd be very surprised to hear any.
Other questions? I have one for you.
Sure, Tony.
We have, according to the Washington Post, we have about 4 million visitors to the World War II Memorial. Do you have any estimates of how many we plan here?
No, and it won't be that scale. I mean, the National Mall is unique, and that's why everybody wants to be on the mall, is to take advantage of that foot traffic. So I don't anticipate 4 million, but we're right across the street from where everybody walks by to go to the White House.
Right.
And so we think that there's significant traffic coming by this site anyway. We think that we can draw people here. So I don't have an estimate on numbers. It won't be what's on the mall, but we think it'll be significant.
Do you have any family, so could you talk a little bit about your own involvement? You said you had two grandfathers who were in the war.
Yeah.
Let's talk about where they were and what they did.
Sure, and one of them frankly never got out of this country. He went through officer training, but never came out of the United States. My other grandfather, my grandfather Fountain, grew up on a farm in North Carolina, knew how to handle horses, so they made him an artilleryman, because all the artillery in World War I was drawn by horses. He was in the 81st Black Cat Division, in the 315th Field Artillery Regiment. He was scheduled to go into the front lines on November 12th. So fortunately, perhaps I'm standing here today because he never actually got into the front lines, but he was in theater. I believe he was an alternate. I don't know if he was a delegate to the convention that formed the American Legion, but he was at least an alternate delegate. But he served. He was mustered out in 1919. So, no great stories of World War I heroism in my family. And frankly, it's not. That's not how I got involved in this. That's more incidental. I came to this effort from a historic preservation background. I was formerly the president of the DC Preservation League, which is the major historic preservation advocacy group here in Washington. And we had featured the DC War Memorial a number of times in our programs because it had fallen into great disrepair. There was at one point a sapling growing out at the top of that memorial, and it had become very water damaged and stained, and paving around it very difficult to pass. And so Tony mentioned some years ago, in 2008, I formed a World War I Memorial Foundation, whose original purpose was simply to advocate for and raise funds for restoration of that memorial. I will take credit, and I think the Park Service will give me credit, for bringing enough public attention to the condition of the DC War Memorial that when the Park Service received $500 million in stimulus funds for capital projects, and all the park units around the country competed for that money within the Park Service, restoration of the DC War Memorial rose to the top of the list, along with the work that the Park Service did on the reflecting pool and on the Jefferson Memorial. In working with the DC War Memorial, given where it's located, and if you don't know, it's on the National Mall right between the World War II and the Korean Veterans Memorials, right off Independence Avenue, now across the street from the MLK Memorial. You stand at that memorial and you can't help but look around and see the national memorials to the three other great wars of the 20th century, and you can't help but think, why isn't there one to World War I? And as I've said, my sense of symmetry was offended, if nothing else. That the war that essentially led to all those other wars did not similarly have a national memorial. And so that led me to advocacy for a national World War I memorial on the Mall. Through those efforts, that's how I ultimately got appointed to the Centennial Commission.
Just one other question. Is this the first time you're announcing this design competition? Is this actually open, or is this?
It's not open yet. We just, in the last week, have sent out solicitations for a professional advisor to the competition. Most design competitions are not actually run by the commission sponsoring the memorial, but they usually engage an architect or some other professional to serve as professional advisor. And so we have just begun the process of hiring that person. We expect to throw the competition open sometime first quarter of 2015.
First order.
Other questions? Ellen?
You mentioned the Willard and Oliver Carr. What efforts are you conceiving now as potentially being done to help publicize this as the process is going forward with other nearby lodgings, such as the current W Hotel or the Trump Hotel at the old post office, as well as with DC tourism officials?
We've been in touch with the W, and in fact, I think the picture on the right was taken from the rooftop restaurant of the W Hotel. So we've been in touch with the W, been in touch with Oliver Carr, reached out to Marriott, haven't heard from them yet. We will definitely be inviting the Trumps to our initial planning meetings for what should be obvious reasons. And so certainly all the neighbors, I mean, we've even been in touch with the Secret Service already, because of course the inaugural parade goes right by this site. You know, we don't have specific plans yet on publicizing it because we're not there yet, but we think, you know, this is sort of step one right here today. But we're certainly talking it up every chance we have, and again, the first step, once we have a professional advisor on board, our first step will be to have a big sit down with all the stakeholders, and that will certainly include the DC government.
One of America's most popular military-related films is Sergeant York, which of course portrays what happened with the drafting and induction and service of Alvin York, one of the most popular movies of its type ever. There are other films as well. Is there any plan to consider using those and helping to educate the public about what happened during the Great War?
Well, to some extent that's already happened. Turner Classic Movies did a film festival on World War I throughout the month of July, and so every Friday during July they had World War I movie programming. The commission itself has no plans beyond that. We are certainly beginning to make contacts in Hollywood to talk about new feature films. I've always said that what World War I needs is the Ken Burns treatment and the Saving Private Ryan treatment. We've heard of a few projects that are in the works. It was announced some time ago that Leonardo DiCaprio will be playing Woodrow Wilson in an adaptation of A. Scott Berg's biography. Don't know how much that will focus on World War I, and certainly would focus on the political aspects of it here. There's a recent graphic novel by Max Brooks called The Harlem Hellfighters, about a celebrated unit of African-American soldiers who served with great distinction in the war, as well as introducing jazz to Europe. and also enduring the racism of the American military and political establishment at that time. Our understanding is that that novel has been optioned by Sony Pictures and Will Smith. And, I look forward to sitting down across the table from Will Smith and asking him how we'd like to be the Tom Hanks of World War I. Because something like that, I mean, particularly given who he is, a major film production like that would do more than anything the Commission would do over the next 4 years to bring awareness and interest to World War I. That's the nature of our society. And our mission is to penetrate the American consciousness through every channel possible, whether it's through fine art or whether it's through education. One of our commissioners is the chief historian of the History Channel. They've already produced 2 primetime features this year on World War I, and are also using their outlets to middle and secondary education, to middle and to junior high and high schools to get educational content out. There are so many different ways to bring people into World War I, and we hope to deploy all of them.
Other questions? I have another one. Has any consideration been given to the fact that the Pershing Memorial will go down as the Eisenhower Memorial goes up, and General Pershing will be turning over in his grave?
First of all, I don't know that Pershing will be leaving the site. That's a discussion that we haven't had yet. And again, that will be a question, but I don't even know how I would answer that question. And that's something we will engage the stakeholders with. And we will certainly be engaging General Pershing's family on that. I mean, it's interesting. Again, I talked earlier about the great man approach to memorials, and Eisenhower is very much a great man approach, and you can quibble with whether that's the proper thematic approach. The Roosevelt Memorial is in the end about a lot more than Franklin Roosevelt. It's very much about what was happening in the country during his administration. The designs I've seen for the Eisenhower Memorial, and I've not studied them, seem to be much more about Eisenhower himself. So the Pershing Memorial may well be a part of the ultimate design here. I don't know that yet, and so that all remains to be seen.
Other questions? Rob?
I just wondered if you would.
Yes, sir.
I'm Russ Orban, I'm with a local law firm here, but interested in this area. If you would mention a place where everyone can keep track of the activities of the commission and the planning for all of this, their website and things like that.
Obviously, the commission does have a website, and it is worldwar1commission.org, I believe. Dan, does that sound right?
World War, the number 1.
World War I Centennial.
Centennial.org.
It's up and running. For a 100-year-old war, we are pushing modern social media. And so there's the website itself, and then we've got many more active means of directly getting the word out. Appreciate the question.
Are you raising money now?
We are, yes. We're raising money for commission activities in general. History Channel has been very generous, as have other organizations. We've not yet begun formal fundraising for a memorial because we're reluctant to ask for money before Congress has given us approval to do so. Before there's an actual project we can promote. And so we're sort of being sensitive to the timing of that. The design competition we may fund from our own resources, but certainly once the memorial is approved, we will undertake both grassroots fundraising as well as approaching major corporate and foundation donors.
Other questions? I have a final one. Some civil rights groups have brought up the fact that if we have a memorial to World War I, it cannot help but entail a major role for President Wilson, who, as we know, did desegregate the U.S. government when we had, much improvement in race relations between Presidents Lincoln and up to President Wilson. Has the Commission considered this at all?
Question hasn't come up, and again, we're far away from a design. My own personal view is, without commenting on President Wilson himself one way or another, that he would not be particularly visible in this memorial. Again, to me, the memorial is not about the politicians who led us into the war or to the generals who led the troops in the war. It's about the troops. And so I don't think, other than part of the whatever, I don't know what narrative text there might be at the memorial that would talk about Wilson and his leading us into war, but I personally don't anticipate him being a significant presence in the memorial.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very
There's
much. Do we have one more?
Yes, I have a question.
Your name, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Jan Bates, I'm just a private citizen. My question is again about fundraising. Are you going to consider using things like crowdsourcing to get access to small donations from people like yourself who have ancestors who served?
Without speaking to specific channels, absolutely. I don't, obviously the heavy lifting comes from the major donors, but my belief is that war memorials such as this very much ought to be supported by the public at large. And so we will welcome and solicit grassroots donations in small amounts from those who have any interest in the war, and clearly those who have ancestors who fought in the war. So absolutely, that'll be part of our fundraising for this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fountain. Fascinating program. Thank
Thank you,
all
Tony.
for coming.
Appreciate it.